Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Middle East politics have always been about strange political bedfellows. Fighting the Islamic State makes this proposition particularly true. Washington says it is putting together another coalition of the willing. All the while, America's designated enemies are doing all the real fighting. To crosstalk the Islamic State, I'm joined by my guest, Flint Leverett in Washington. He's a professor of international affairs at Penn State University and author of the book, Going to Tehran, Why America Must Accept the Islamic Republic of Iran. Also in Washington, we have Michael Maloof. He is a senior reporter for the World Net Daily and a former Pentagon official. And in Norman, we cross to Joshua Landis. He is the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I very much encourage it. Flint in Washington, if I can go to you first here, before we talk about ISIS or the Islamic State, you know, it seems to me there's this huge learning curve problem since 9/11 for the Americans and the West in general in the Middle East. We continue to do the same things over and over again, and that's the definition of stupidity. Go ahead.
I couldn't agree more. You know, America's self-declared post-9/11 war on terror has been strategically disastrous for the United States. It has weakened America's strategic position in the Middle East and globally, squandered vast material and human resources, and has basically destroyed the perceived legitimacy of American purposes in the Middle East for the vast majority of people who live in this strategically critical region. And now President Obama is effectively recommitting the United States to this profoundly self-damaging post-9/11 template for never-ending war in the Middle East. It is insane.
You know, Joshua, these awful beheadings that we see on YouTube. But, you know, ISIS or the Islamic State, they're just itching. They're just begging for the United States to go for them because we know counterinsurgency programs don't work. They want a fight because they want to show the world that they can take on the great evil, the great Americans, and the Americans, given the recent history, will not succeed in destroying them. They want to fight. Go ahead, Joshua.
Very possibly they do. It's not clear whether they've just they think they can intimidate America or whether they actually want to draw America into this fight because it may rally Sunnis around their cause. But the United States, as you said in your beginning setup, is making a classic mistake here, which is that they have catapulted the Shiites to the top of society in Iraq. And they're trying to do something similar but opposite in Syria, which is to put the Sunnis on the top of society. And we've been fighting the Sunnis in Anbar province and in Iraq, and we're trying to aid the Sunni rebels against the Shiites in Syria. So these two halves, which have now conjoined, don't fit together because, in a sense, we're aiding the same rebels that have been undermining Iraq. So this is the conundrum for the United States policy right now.
Okay, Michael, I mean, not only has the United States not been able to deal with the civil war in Syria and the civil war in Iraq, now it wants to take on both of them simultaneously. I mean, what's the plan? Is there a plan?
Well, I'm in the amen choir here because it is fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. It's very clear that the so-called strategy that Mr. Obama came up with lacks any kind of substance. You're not going to be able to fight ISIS and fight Syria and at the same time, and not, we should be bringing them in at this point, as well as Iran, and to continuously cater to the Saudis, who have now, in a grand way, offered bases to train these Sunni fighters, like the Free Syrian Army, which we now know and they've also informed us that they've signed a non-aggression pact with ISIS. It just shows that there's total confusion in President Obama's policy in handling ISIS, and ISIS knows this. ISIS is going to take advantage of it.
You know, Flint, I have to say that when I heard that Saudi Arabia is going to train moderates. I thought, there's nothing moderate about Saudi Arabia. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, again, I can't get my head around it.
I have been saying for over 3 years that the idea that there's some, moderate secular Syrian opposition with enough military potential and, even more importantly, enough political standing in Syria to overthrow the Assad government is just, flies in the face of reality. To say that this, mythical moderate Syrian opposition is now going to be able to take on the Islamic State, I think is just delusional. And I think that the Syria policy that the United States and its partners in the region have been pursuing since the spring of 2011 has basically helped in a big way to create the situation in Iraq with this dramatic ascendance of the Islamic State. We have created this problem, and now we're coming up with pseudo solutions that are only going to make the problem worse.
Joshua, you can. You went. They took the devil's advocate. You could see some policymakers in Washington liking this whole idea. It's chaos. It's utter chaos. You can keep shaping and reshaping and molding and pushing one faction. It's really quite interesting because when you look at ISIS, everybody's got a stake in the game, and the Americans can manipulate, and the Saudis manipulate different outcomes here, and no one ever wins. It just keeps going on and on and on. It's war for war's sake.
I don't see it quite as Machiavellian as that. I think Obama knows fairly well that he doesn't have a good policy. But this is about domestic politics in the United States.
Yeah.
When we were fighting, this is not World War II. When we were fighting Hitler, Stalin, the U.S. worked together because this was a cataclysmic event. It was very dangerous for both powers. They had to get along even though they hated each other.
Yeah.
In Syria, Obama doesn't really care. He knows that he needs an ally to take the ground when he bombs, and that could be Assad. It could be, he needs Iran, but he doesn't, politically in Washington, it would be death for him if he allied with either one of those two powers. They don't have any friends in Washington, so he's not going to ally with them. And he will just pick off the top ISIS guys or their trucks from the air, and it won't really solve the problem, but it will fix his leadership problem in Washington for the time being. And I think that's what he's doing. This is a very, he is trying to solve it. He's only giving $500 million to the Syrian opposition, which is testament to the fact that he doesn't trust them. Yep. He said they could never win in his own interview with Friedman. And he doesn't trust them. He's only giving $500 million is chump change. It's not going to do anything. We gave hundreds of billions to the Iraqi army, and we saw what happened to that in the face of ISIS. He's giving $500 million. It's an honorarium in order to a placeholder, but they're going to be very deceived.
Flint, do you want to jump in there? Go ahead.
I would suggest that I basically agree with Josh, but I think that even giving $500 million to the Syrian opposition is not going to be just a kind of relatively cost-free honorarium. I mean, basically, the one thing that could come of this is that you're going to create more channels for the Islamic State to get hold of Western weapons and military equipment that it already has. That will be, and having the Saudis train these so-called moderate fighters is just going to augment the problem that we're supposedly trying to deal with. We have fed the creation of the Islamic State through our policy of support for the Syrian opposition, and it's going to have huge repercussions regionally. I mean, President Obama can declare all he wants that the Islamic State isn't Islamic, but the fact is, as evidenced in polls, in social media across the Sunni Arab world, is that this movement has a lot of sympathy and support, even among constituencies that don't like some of its tactics, don't like prisoner beheadings. And by launching this military campaign against them, the United States is basically, in the eyes of a lot of Sunni Muslims, it is basically relaunching a post-9/11 war against Islam. And the one thing we know over 13 years since 9/11 is that drives jihadi recruitment more than anything. It is going to make this problem vastly worse.
Michael, it's very easy to agree with Flint here, but what's going to stop the Saudis? Because nothing's going to stop the Saudis. They continue to fund these groups here. I mean, and America's second or first most important ally in the region. I mean, the contradictions are just mind-boggling.
Well, I think a number of things. First of all, the Saudis, in my view, and based upon some people I've spoken to, the Saudis may have already paid extortion money to ISIS not to attack the kingdom. Why in the world would they then bring these so-called moderates like FSA, who already have subscribed to the ISIS agenda, to come into the kingdom for training? It just doesn't make any sense. And also, you're not going to have the Gulf Arab countries who are Sunni going against other Sunnis. It's just, that's why this policy of President Obama is fundamentally flawed, and that's why we need to be looking more toward saddling up with Assad and with Iran to make this a successful effort, because I think fundamentally the Syrians remain pro-American. They want to work with the United States. We had an opportunity in 2003 to work with them closely, and we blew it. And we're on that track once again. And unfortunately, it's the same people who were advising Bush then are basically pushing for this so-called strategy now, and it's a prescription for disaster.
Okay, on that point, gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on the Islamic State. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing how to deal with the Islamic State. Okay, I'd like to go to Flint in Washington. Before we went to the break, Michael mentioned a number of countries. We can look at Syria. We can look at Iran. We could even consider Hezbollah. All these people are fighting ISIS right now, or would be or against them. And the United States continues to turn their back on them. This is just absurdity. This is ridiculous. If ISIS is the worstest, the baddest, and the meanest, and the most dangerous, then you have to saddle up with your enemies to take care of this, as we heard earlier from Josh. Okay, again, the absurdity of it all boggles the mind. Go ahead, Flint.
I agree. You know, the Obama administration pays lip service to the idea of needing a regional strategy against the Islamic State, and as a general proposition, I think that idea is incontrovertible. But unfortunately, the administration's notion of a regional strategy is basically to turn to Sunni Arab, Sunni Muslim states that are in various ways dependent on the United States for their security, who, as we've been discussing, have their own agendas vis-a-vis various groups, various issues at play in Iraq that don't always line up with American interests, that we are not going to be able to coordinate with very effectively to make sure that everyone is pulling in the direction that we want. And in fact, in some ways, we should almost be glad that in many cases the Turks or the Saudis or others are really only kind of giving lip service themselves to the idea of cooperating with us, and they'll basically be pursuing their own agendas. Because if these guys really did put troops on the ground in Iraq in a big way, I think it just further delegitimizes the whole project in the eyes of Sunni Arab and Sunni Muslim publics. The publics in these countries don't want their governments fighting the Islamic State. They don't want this to go down. And if it does, I mean, the idea that somehow having Saudi cooperation or Jordanian cooperation is going to make this more legitimate in the eyes of people in the region, I think that's just delusional. If anything, it's going to compound the perceived illegitimacy of it.
You know, Josh, in some circles in Washington, it's still really just about Syria. It's still about regime change in Syria. This is the second chance, a great opportunity because, well, considering the very poor state of Russia-American relations, we're not going to see a repeat of last year of a coordinated effort. And there's absolutely no way that anyone or most people in Washington will never allow Iran to be legitimized as being a good guy helping out, okay? Because if you did deal with Syria, you did deal with Iran, you'd have a lot more chips in your pocket to play.
It's true. There is the geostrategic element, which Flint drew out nicely, but there's also an ideological element, and that is that 70% of Syrians are Sunni Arab, and it's very difficult for Washington, who has demonized Assad and the minorities in Syria who have ruled over the Sunnis. So they cannot, it's very difficult for them to flip and help the minority rule over the majority. It's easy in Iraq to help the Shiites dominate the Sunnis because the Sunnis are only about 25–30% of the population. So you can make the argument that it's majoritarian rule and it's tough luck for the Sunnis. But in Syria, it's much more difficult. On the geostrategic level, Iran, Israel, Syria has been an enemy of Israel since 1948, since it attacked Israel and went to war to defend Palestinians in 1948. And that has put it at cross purposes with the United States. Mm-hmm. And today, both Saudi Arabia and Israel are on the same page when it comes to trying to fight Iran and Syria, which makes it very difficult for Obama to take the side of our allies' enemies. And he isn't going to do it. Syria is just not that important to him. And that's really what it comes down to. He will kill ISIS from the skies, but he is not going to side with Iran and Assad against the Sunnis, the Saudis, and the Israelis. It's just not going to happen.
Michael, let me ask you, is it all about Syria for a lot of people in the town that you're sitting in right now? Because there is another opportunity, and once you say somebody has to go, what they eventually do, I mean, Mr. Assad's been around a long time and surprised everyone, but this is a second chance. And, you tell, Mr. Obama says that, if Syria tries to defend itself, it will be attacked by the United States. I mean, Syria doesn't even have international law. It's not even allowed to have international law. It's not allowed to have sovereignty here. That's, an extraordinary statement to make. And again, it must resonate through the entire region, the hypocrisy of Washington's policy.
Well, there's considerable pressure here for the administration to continue to seek regime change in Syria. That's why I think Obama's also getting pressure from the Saudis ultimately to do the same thing. Even though even though the King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia reportedly recently told Russian President Putin that he no longer wanted regime change in Syria, I think that that's a ruse. And secondly, you're not going to. We have an additional problem, which we haven't even raised here yet, and that is Turkey. Turkey is the main conduit, financial conduit for ISIS, and it's also a member of NATO. It's also Sunni, and it is vying for influence. And its economic minister has already stated that they look forward to doing business in ISIS-controlled areas in Iraq, and you're not going because we have a NATO partner who is opposing this effort, even though in Paris all of the other NATO allies said we gotta kill ISIS. The Turks never signed that agreement. So that is a fundamental problem that we're going to have to deal with. Yeah, but
Michael, we have to remember there's a lot of hostages out there that the Turks are really worried about. Okay, and considering those videos,
I think that's an excuse.
It's on the table. It's on the table here. Let's change gears real quick here. Flint. I mean, it seems like the American public is buying it. Every single poll, Americans are tired of these long, expensive wars. Is it because of these horrific videos and the mantra, something must be done, something must be done? Is that it? Because I'm really a bit surprised by this.
I think there's been a bit of a misreading of the polls here. I mean, it's certainly true that particularly the beheadings of the two American journalists, Mr. Foley, Mr. Sotloff, that those videos did have an impact on public opinion in that it made the public more accepting of U.S. military re-engagement in Iraq. But I wouldn't say it created a kind of public clamor out in the country for military action. That's something which has been generated here in Washington by political elites, and that the Obama administration is responding to. If Obama had wanted to stay out of this, which I think would have been a much smarter course, or to pursue, a more genuinely regional approach to dealing with this, I think public opinion would have allowed him to do it. Public opinion became more permissive, but it wasn't demanding that the United States take military action. And just because the public will permit it doesn't mean it's a smart thing to do.
Yeah. Josh, it's really interesting here. I mean, you can use drones, you can use planes, but anything more than that, than these ISIS fighters, they just blend into the landscape here. Again, it seems to me that they're really itching to have the Americans come in, because the Americans always lose when they put boots on the ground, or it never comes out the way they expected.
Well, I think, in defense of Obama, I think that he was smart to stop this incredible advances of ISIS, especially when they're attacking the Yazidis, the Christians of Mosul, the people of Mosul, and it looked like they were threatening Baghdad, which America just could not allow them to move into Baghdad. So everybody got spooked, and it was important to just stop that momentum, roll it back a little bit. The question that really, that we're all raising here is, he said he's going to degrade, but then he's going to destroy. It's the destroy part. If he wants to destroy this, he needs a much more powerful policy. He is going to have to work with people on the ground who can really take over this giant expanse of land that's the size of Great Britain, 6 million people, and rule it with some modicum of justice. And that he does not have a plan for. And so either you come up with a good plan, or you don't say you're going to destroy it. Yeah. You just limit it, and you limit your intervention. And I think that's where he could have limited, and I think that he will go slowly and sort of play this out until he's no longer president.
Exactly.
Instead of really trying to destroy it.
Michael.
And that's going to upset people.
Exactly, yeah. Michael. Let me give Michael the last word on the program. It's going to be the next president's problem, not his. Obama will walk away from this one. He'll say, he tried, and it'll go to the next presidency, and we'll have another long war. Go ahead, 40 seconds, Michael.
Well, I think that this is the inevitable conclusion, and I think that it gets him out of it, and he's basically casting it on over, but it doesn't resolve the issue of what's going on the ground. And by that time, things could be much, much worse if we don't take the kind of effective action that we've been outlining this morning, and getting with our ally, and getting with Syria and with Iran, and coordinating. I also would like to see the Russians with their counter-terrorism program come in, because ISIS has ultimately changed its tactics. It's becoming much more mobile. It's taken on a much more of a counterinsurgency approach.
Okay. Michael, on that point, on that note, we've run out of time, gentlemen. We've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in Norman, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.